In this lesson, we're going to talk about plot, conflict, foreshadowing, and summarizing. When we talk about these, it's going to be based on a short story called The School Play, written by Gary Soto. If you'd like to read this, I'll link it in Google Classroom. But if you just Google The School Play by Gary Soto, you'll want to read this first to understand what's going on in this lesson. And again, just Google this, it'll come up. And there's other resources too, but there's a copy of this. All right, so plot. Generally in plot, you have like this arc. If you look at the line drawn on here, start with an exposition. That's where the story gets kind of explained. You learn who the characters are. You then have some rising action and development of conflict. In the story of the school play, there's two main conflicts. There's an internal and an external conflict going on. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You then have the climax, which is the peak of the action, and generally where the conflict kind of comes to the most exciting point, falling action, resolution. And the school play by Gary Soto does a great job of really kind of laying this out very clearly in a nice, neat way, which is not all fiction will do that, but Gary Soto does a great job of it in the school play. So the exposition at the beginning, you kind of learn who the main character is, and it talks about how he's having trouble remembering his lines for a school play, and then he also introduces the other conflict of the external. That's the internal conflict. It then introduces the external conflict, where there's this girl Belinda who is like she's really mean, and he's worried that she's gonna beat him up and if he messes up his line. So he's worried about remembering. He only has one line in the school play. He's worried about remembering it and doing a good job, and at the same time not messing up because he's worried what Belinda will do to him if he does mess up. So that's kind of your rising action, where it lays that out, tells you what the school play's about, this group called the Donner Party and everything, and kind of lays that out, builds up to finally it's time to perform the play. And all up to this, you're kind of thinking he's going to remember it because he's been practicing so much. But then right before he's about to go on stage, he tries to remember his line, and he's getting the words all mixed up and everything. So he finally goes on stage, and that's kind of your climax. And it's time for him to deliver his line, and he says the right words, but in the wrong order. Spoiler alert. So if you haven't read, you've just been spoiled. So now he does that, and then it kind of falls down. It finishes up the play. His teacher actually comes to him and says, hey, almost perfect, right? So he did remember his line. Belinda just pinches him a little bit so he doesn't get, beaten up. So it kind of starts to kind of tie up those loose ends and resolve where the action falls, where his play is finished up. He's delivered his line. He made a little mistake. And then the resolution is where his teacher says, you didn't do too bad. He feels good about himself. So the internal conflict, he feels like he did a decent job. And Belinda doesn't beat him up, and that's kind of your resolution. So exposition and the rising action kind of blend into each other, into the climax, where you have your falling action that blends into your resolution in terms of the plot. All right, next, conflict. I've already talked about a couple of these other ones, so these next few boards will go a little bit faster. Conflict. You have your external, it's kind of outside the character. So this would be between, this is where Belinda came into play in the school play. Robert and Belinda. I don't think I've said Robert's name yet. So Robert's the main character. But him and Belinda and that conflict where Robert's worried what Belinda's going to do to him, that's external. That's outside the character. Internal is inside. This is supposed to be a brain. And Belinda, and has nothing to do with Belinda. It has to do with Robert remembering his lines and worried he's going to mess that up. So that's inside versus the outside. Foreshadowing is hints or clues that an author gives. So there's two forms of foreshadowing. Throughout most of this, you think Robert's going to kind of do it right because the author keeps talking about how he's practicing his lines. So you think if he's practicing, he's going to do well. And then it gives you a hint right before he goes on where he starts to try to remember his line and he can't remember it. And he's remembering it in the wrong order and everything. That's foreshadowing that hints to you that he's going to mess it up when he goes out on stage. So that's just, authors sometimes give a hint. And another example is, I've noticed in some of the reading my son does with the Captain Underpants books, he oftentimes reads about that and it says this can't possibly get any worse. And so when he does that, and then the next chapter is, it gets worse. So that's foreshadowing. That's foreshadowing, and that's hints or clues of what's coming next. Finally is the summary. To summarize your story here, you want to kind of use the strategy somebody wanted, but so then. And you answer these questions, but then you want to write sentences. So somebody in this story would be Robert. What did Robert want to do? He wanted to remember his line and do well in the play, but he started to forget it before the play, so he messed it up a little bit during the play. Then he got pinched, but he still felt like he did a decent job. So when you read the summary, you'd be like, Robert wanted to remember his lines for the school play because he was afraid of, one, just messing them up in general and doing a bad job, and then two, what Belinda would do to him. So this is a little more complicated than necessarily a simple story. It has two main conflicts. But, so then you might say, however, right before he was about to say his line, he started messing up the words. Instead of saying so, you could say, as a result, Belinda did pinch him, but his teacher said he did an almost perfect job. Then he felt pretty good about himself, and he didn't get beat up by Belinda. So that would kind of be the end of that. Hopefully this helps you kind of understand foreshadowing, summary, conflict, and plot.